Jesus is the king who fought the greatest battle of history on his knees. The story begins in a dark garden called Gethsemane. While the world was sleeping, Jesus was awake under the twisted branches of old olive trees. He knew exactly what was coming. He knew about the pain, the nails, and the weight of every sin ever committed. The pressure was so heavy that his sweat became like great drops of blood falling onto the dusty ground. He asked his Father if there was any other way to save humanity, but he chose our life over his own comfort. He stayed because he loved us. He stood up from prayer and whispered, "Your will be done," ready to face the darkness so we could live in the light. Suddenly, the silence of the night was broken by the sound of marching boots and flickering torches. A crowd arrived with swords and clubs, led by one of his own friends. With a single kiss, Jesus was betrayed. His disciples wanted to fight, but Jesus stopped them. He even healed the ear of a soldier who came to arrest him. He did not use his power to escape. He used his power to show mercy. They bound his hands and dragged him through the streets of Jerusalem while his friends fled into the shadows. Jesus is the innocent lamb who stayed silent while the world accused him. All through the night, Jesus was shuffled from one house to another. High priests and powerful leaders shouted lies about him, but he remained calm. They spit in his face and struck him with their hands. They mocked him, asking him to prove his power, but he did not say a word to defend himself. He was the only perfect man to ever live, yet he stood in the place of a criminal. As the sun began to rise, he was brought before a man named Pilate. The Roman leader found no fault in him and tried to let him go, but the angry crowd chose a murderer to be set free instead of the Savior. To please the crowd, soldiers took Jesus and whipped him until he was unrecognizable. They twisted branches of sharp thorns into a crown and jammed it onto his head. They put a purple robe on him and bowed in mockery, shouting, "Hail, King of the Jews!" Through all the blood and the pain, Jesus looked at them with love, knowing this was the only way to pay our debt. Jesus is the Savior who took our place, so that we could be set free. The soldiers forced him to carry a massive, rough wooden cross. The beam was heavy, and his body was broken, but he dragged it through the narrow streets of the city. Women wept as he passed, but he told them not to weep for him. He reached the top of a hill called Calvary, the place of the skull. There, they laid him on the wood and drove thick nails through his hands and feet. Even as they lifted the cross into the air, Jesus did not call for fire from heaven. Instead, he looked at the soldiers who nailed him there and said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." He hung there for hours between two thieves. One mocked him, but the other asked for mercy. Jesus promised that man, "Today you will be with me in paradise." At the moment of his greatest suffering, he was still saving souls. Jesus is the light that the darkness could never extinguish. At noon, something impossible happened. The sun stopped shining, and a thick, terrifying darkness covered the entire land for 3 hours. The earth began to tremble. Jesus cried out with a loud voice, "It is finished." This was not a cry of defeat. It was a shout of victory. The debt was paid. The work was done. At that exact second, the massive, heavy curtain in the temple was torn in half from top to bottom, showing that the way to God was finally open to everyone. A Roman soldier, seeing how Jesus died, whispered in fear, "Surely this was the Son of God." Friends of Jesus came and took his body down with great care. They wrapped him in clean linen and placed him in a new tomb carved out of solid rock. A giant stone, weighing thousands of pounds, was rolled in front of the entrance. The leaders sealed the tomb and placed armed guards there, thinking they had finally ended the story of Jesus. Saturday was a day of silence and tears. It looked like the darkness had won. Jesus is the resurrection and the life who broke the power of the grave. But early on Sunday morning, while it was still dark, the earth began to shake violently once again. A brilliant light exploded from the sky as an angel descended and rolled back the massive stone like it was a pebble. The guards were so terrified they fell to the ground like dead men. The tomb was not opened to let Jesus out. It was opened to show the world that he was already gone. When the women arrived with spices, they found the stone moved and the tomb empty. An angel sitting there told them, "He is not here. He has risen, just as he said." Mary Magdalene stood weeping in the garden until she heard a familiar voice call her name. She turned and saw him, not a ghost, not a dream, but the living, breathing King. Jesus had conquered death. He had defeated the grave. He appeared to his disciples, showing them the scars in his hands, proving that he was alive forevermore. Because he lives, we no longer have to fear death. Because he won, we have a hope that never dies. To follow the risen King every day, subscribe to Christmas Tree Channel.